Good afternoon for everybody, and today we continue our traveling or nice academic journey, virtual academic journey through the world. And we have our good friend and good lecturer and very nice educator, I would say, Laila Boisselle. She is curriculum development and expert and teacher educator with different interests, and interest area obviously so large, different activities, different interests, and etc. But I hope that Laila will introduce herself in more details possible, better than me. Okay, Laila, please, now it's your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vincentas, and thanks to everybody for having me. I must apologize that I cannot speak your language. I'm very sorry about that, and I do offer my apology.
Laila, it's never late to start.
Okay, this is good. This is good news. I will definitely practice some words and phrases, and if I get the whole language, this would be wonderful. You will have to teach me some of it, Vincentas, definitely. So thanks for having me here. I'll tell you a little bit about me. Can you see my screen as yet? An introduction to the education system of Trinidad and Tobago. Are you seeing that?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, so I am Laila Boisselle, and I am actually from Trinidad and Tobago. And I am a teacher educator. Next year I will be teaching for 30 years. And I started off my teaching as a secondary school teacher. Secondary school in my system is anybody more than 12 years old. So from 12 to 18 years old is secondary school. So I used to teach chemistry, math, and general science when I started off. So I taught chemistry, math, and general science for about 13 years. I was a head of department in my school. I've taught at a variety of school types, and I'll tell you about that as we move along. After 13 years, I was invited to come to the university. I had started my postgraduate work and so on already, and I was invited to come to the university to begin to train teachers. So I have been training teachers for the last 17 years, both in my country and in the United Arab Emirates. So I have trained all levels of teachers. My focus is primarily on science education and curriculum, just as Dr. Professor Vincentas said, because I am primarily a science educator, but my master's degree is in education. So my first degree is in chemistry. Then I have my postgrad DPed in teacher education for science education. Then my master's degree is in curriculum development, and my doctoral degree is from the University of Sheffield in education, but I focused on science education, and particular indigenous sciences and the integration of indigenous and basically cultural-based sciences into the curriculum of regular science classes. So that's a little bit about me. I have taught teachers from ECE, teachers who are teaching ECE, which is early childhood, teachers who teach primary school, and teachers who teach secondary school, how to teach. So let's get to it. So I'm saying again, thank you so much for having me here. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the education system of Trinidad and Tobago. Stop me anytime, because I know, Professor Vincentas, do you want to do the questions as we go along or at the end? Anything works? Okay, so
sorry, possible students will raise some questions in chat during your presentation.
Yeah, so let's do it that way. So maybe just raise your hand and drop something in the chat, and I will stop, because it might be a lot of content and it might be difficult to take the questions at the end. So I'm thinking perhaps as we go along, if we chat about any questions or anything you want to add to the presentation that you yourself have experienced, then it could probably be a richer, deeper presentation. So the next thing is, so the first thing I'm going to tell you is who are we in Trinidad and Tobago, right? So I need to tell you this story first so you will understand our education system better, because our education system is based very much on who we are as a people, the makeup of our society, and how we are trying really to embrace diversity within our society and to give everybody the opportunity to practice their culture and their identity within our society. And our schools actually take that very much into consideration. So this is Trinidad and Tobago here, right? So if we go to the first one on the world map, you will see we are a very, very tiny country. We are like so tiny. We are only 1.4 million people. We are right off the coast of Venezuela. We are like 7 kilometers off of Venezuela right here. So literally, if you swim anywhere you are in certain parts of Trinidad and Tobago, you can look out and you can see Venezuela. The closest thing here is 7 kilometers from Venezuela, which is on our south coast. So we actually believe, I think at some point in time, we broke off from South America and we became this little island. So for a very long time, hundreds of years, I guess, we have had relationships with South America and with Venezuelans. A lot of our fishermen and so on fish in this little channel and they have interactions. We also have a lot of Venezuelans who live in our country. So you can see us right there. If you look at the world map, we're right at the top of South America. And then here, these are the islands of the Caribbean. And the islands of the Caribbean, which are important, go from South America all the way up to North America. And we are the most southerly island in the Caribbean. This is our shape. This is Trinidad. And the smaller island here to the top is Tobago. And Trinidad and Tobago, even though we are 2 islands, 1 state, we are exceptionally different. We're like 2 separate countries, both in the way that we look, both in our culture, in the way the islands are set up. Trinidad is very, very business oriented. Because of its position, it tends to be used as a business hub for people between South America and North America. Because if you are down, say here in the tip of Argentina, it's really just easier to come to Trinidad if you're in North America and Argentina and meet here than to fly up north or to fly all the way down south. So Trinidad tends to be very, very much focused on business. We also don't have very beautiful waters like people think in the Caribbean because of where we are. We are actually in the mouth of the Orinoco River. So coming off of Venezuela here, the Orinoco River actually exits here and it dirties our water. But the thing about that makes it good for us as well is there is oil in this water. And because there is oil in this water for many decades, we have made our living off of oil and gas. The blue, beautiful waters that people see when they see pictures of the Caribbean is really because of this Caribbean Sea. So our other island, which is Tobago up here, really is in the Caribbean Sea. There's a little bit of the Atlantic Ocean coming off here. So in some parts of Tobago, you'll see this black water of the Atlantic if you go far off enough of the coast. But Tobago is like a totally different place. And it tends to be very tourist oriented, more so than Trinidad and Tobago. And this is our flag. So these are some seriously cool things I think we've given the world. We're a very, very small country, as I said, about 1.4 million people. But these are some of our noteworthy Trinidadians. Sylvia Naipaul, who's a Nobel laureate in literature. Heather Headley, she won for Aida and Audience of One and so on. Janelle Penny-Commiss, this is Heather Headley, this is Sylvia Naipaul. This is Penny-Commiss-Young, who's the first Black Miss Universe. This is Peter Minshall, who is a carnival visionary. He's directed the Olympic opening for Barcelona in 1992. Atlanta in 1996, Salt Lake City 2002, and he's a co-creator of the Dancing Man, which you see a lot all over the place. You know, it's like a man and they put air into him and he sorts of dances left and right. He's this guy, but he's really very good as an artist. He's one of our best visionaries in terms of art and culture. And for that, of course, he was recognized by the Olympic Committee to carry out these works. We have also invented the steel pan. A lot of people think it's Jamaica, but it's Trinidad and Tobago. We have this other guy here, Dr. Bert Jeffrey Achong, who co-discovered the Epstein-Barr virus, which is a virus that helps to cause cancer. And we were also the first country in the world to celebrate Emancipation Day in 1985. So this is our coat of arms, and this is going to become more important. What the coat of arms says, and the fact that we've changed our coat of arms, says a lot about our history. So on the left-hand side, and as I said, our history really informs our education system. So on the left-hand side, we see the smaller one is our old coat of arms. And these three boats on the coat of arms are actually representing the ships that Columbus used, because Columbus is the first one that stumbled across our island, Christopher Columbus, coming from Spain. So when he came to Trinidad and Tobago, he came in these three ships, the Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta. So for many, many decades, because our independence was in 1962, this was our coat of arms, and it represented Columbus coming over and finding our islands. Recently, we switched to the new coat of arms because, of course, this was a past history. It's a colonial history, and we decided that what we wanted to do at this point in time is we wanted to represent more of who we were. So we changed the three ships in the middle to the steel pan, which is our national instrument. These are our national birds, the scarlet ibis. This is the coquelicot. The one on the right is the coquelicot, and this one is found in our smaller island of Tobago. The scarlet ibis on the left is found in Trinidad and Tobago, and these two birds are known as, these are the hummingbirds. And why is the hummingbird important? So the hummingbird is really important to us because actually we were originally known as Ieri, which is the land of the hummingbird. Now, two things happened. Many years ago, about 7,000 years ago, we actually broke off from Venezuela, like I said. And at that point in time, because we were very small compared to Venezuela, we were simply known as the island or Cairi. And we were simply known as the island or Cairi. Because in relation to Venezuela or the South American continent, we were very tiny. Later on, the Arawak nation or the Lokono nation, which is an Amerindian nation, gave us the name Ieri, which means or translates into the hummingbird, the land of the hummingbird. So the First Nations peoples who were there, and there were about 40,000 First Nations people by the time Christopher Columbus arrived in 1498, and claimed Cairi, which is known as the island for the Spanish crown, and he named it La Trinidad or the Trinity. And the reason he named it La Isla de Trinidad is because here on our north coast, where you see the northern range, this was the first thing he saw. So he saw these three mountains, or these three peaks of these mountains, and he said, okay, because it's three peaks, he's going to name it La Trinity, after La Trinity. So he named it La Isla de Trinidad, or the island of the Trinity. But the name when he got there was already Ieri, given to it by the Lokono tribe. And when he got there, there were many tribes here, such as the Aruka tribe, the Garini tribe, Napoyo, Shibayo, and Yao nations. And they were already at on Ieri at the time. So like for me, I am also mixed with the Poyo nation. I am mixed with both Garifuna, which is not here. Garifuna is another island, which is St. Vincent, and Napoyo. Now, in 1889, what happened? Tobago was not always, Trinidad and Tobago were not always joined. And Trinidad and Tobago were really only joined for no other reason but efficiency. So it was simply efficient for the administration of the two islands. So the British, to whom we were passed at some point in time, because we have had more than one colonizer within the Caribbean. So at some point in time when we were owned by the British, they joined the two islands together for the sake of administrative efficiency. So this is a little bit more about the colonial foundations of Trinidad and Tobago. And I need you to see this because you will see how it shapes the kinds of schools that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. So Trinidad was first a Spanish colony, as we said, because Christopher Columbus came in 1498. So for over 300 years, right? But we had really very little actual Spanish population on the island, even though they owned the island, and development was minimal. The French at some point in time, right? So we're seeing 1498. So the Spanish were here, even though they owned us. There was really very little activity on the island in terms of a lot of Spaniards coming and occupying the island. When we got now, we can see the next step. The French was fleeing upheavals in the French Caribbean, such as in Saint Dominique, Haiti, Martinique, Guadeloupe. And Spain saw an opportunity to attract them to Trinidad and Tobago to stimulate agriculture and secure the island. Britain then captured Trinidad in 1797, but it really wasn't legally theirs until 1802 with the Treaty of Amiens. So after emancipation, then in 1838, the planters lacked labor and Britain began to implement indentureship from India, from China, from Portugal, from Madeira in Portugal, and later migration waves included Syrian Lebanese traders escaping Ottoman persecution and economic hardship. Now, I'm not pretending to you that I am a historian, because I am not. I am a science educator, as I told you. But what is happening, as I said, is that we really have to understand what is happening historically in order for us to understand what it's all about. So basically you have 1498, the Spanish come and they inhabit the island, but they don't really do much for the island. In 1783, the cedula population invites French planters, and the French planters were already in the Caribbean. Some of them, they were in the French Caribbean, such as Martinique and so on. Haiti, they say in Guadeloupe, Haiti, Martinique. And Spain saw an opportunity to attract them. So when they had a cedula population, a lot of free peoples and a lot of Frenchmen came to Trinidad and Tobago in order to help with agriculture and so on. In 1797, Britain captures Trinidad, right? And then in 1802, Spain cedes Trinidad again. So it keeps going back and forth is what was basically happening with the island between a number of people. And then in 1838, when we had emancipation, all of the slaves actually moved away from the land. And what happened, because the slaves had been traumatized by working on the plantations for a very long time. And what happened at that point when the slaves moved away from the agricultural lands and they moved into the cities is that there was nobody to plant the land and there was nobody to grow food. So what happened is the land therefore became, basically we had no agriculture, we had no food. And then what they did is they had to begin bringing in Indian indentureship. So even though Indians were then brought from India during that time period, they were given an indentureship, but the difference between them is that when Africans became free after emancipation, they did not get anything for it. They were not paid, they didn't get any land or anything like that. Indians came from India to work as indentured laborers. And then when they left the land, after they had worked out the period of their indentureship, because basically you would come to the island from India and they would say, okay, you will work a certain number of years as an indentured laborer. And then when you are released from that bond of indentureship, you then inherit, you actually got paid in land. Sorry. So Indians stayed on the land actually, and they do still are very heavily involved in agriculture compared to our African population. And then also we had Chinese migration, and we had migration from the Syrian Lebanese. What this means for Trinidad and Tobago is we have people from all over the world, and we have a very diverse community. So these are some of the things I talked about before. So this Treaty of Amiens, you will probably know more about it than I do. You had this temporary peace between Britain and France when they were fighting. I believe this is the Napoleonic War, and both sides had been exhausted financially. So in order to stabilize Europe and reopen trade, Spain basically ceded Trinidad to Britain. And then we also spoke about the migration waves with the African enslavement, the Indian indentureship, which brought 147,000 arrivals. We had Chinese migration, and we had Syrian Lebanese migration, which was really escaping Ottoman hardship. And the Syrian Lebanese became merchants, and they are still merchants in our society. The Chinese in our society are also business owners. Our society is mostly made up of Indian and African descent at this time, and we have Chinese, we have Syrian Lebanese, and we have a scattering of other kinds of people. So we're still describing this, the cellular population. So basically, this cellular population is Spain was losing influence in the Caribbean, as we said, by the 1700s. Trinidad and Tobago was strategically important, but it was basically empty. It didn't have anybody. So what the cellular did is the cellular transformed Trinidad and Tobago almost overnight. Because as we said, it was this Spanish decree inviting the Catholic French planters, because the French were Catholic like the Spanish, and the free people of color and enslaved Africans, they said, listen, come over, and they gave them tax breaks. They said you could practice your religion, you could get land cheap, so that Spain could actually populate the island and increase the economic activity of the island. So this is also why, like Professor Vincentas and I were talking about my name. That's how come I'm Laila Boisselle, because at some point in time, my great-grandfather came over from France and settled on the island for these reasons. So the cellular transformed Trinidad and Tobago almost overnight, culturally, economically, and demographically. So that's how come I have the French name. And in my country, I'm called French Creole, because I've already told you that I have Amerindian heritage, Napoyo and Garifuna. Obviously, I have African heritage. If you look at me, I also have heritage that is French because of my name. And I also have ancestors from Wales and from Portugal, because one thing my society is very good at is intermarrying. So Catholicism, plantation society, it all expanded rapidly during the cellular. And without the cellular, okay, hold on, let me get to the next slide. It's just taking a little while to change. Right. So this is what happens, and this is basically what we look like. So if you look at these pictures now, you can see we have a Chinatown. You can see with some of the pictures here, we have our First Nations people up here on the right. This is the Syrian Lebanese Women's Association. This is actually our Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister is currently East Indian, of East Indian descent. Here we have Emancipation Day. So you can see our people who are of African descent. And here, of course, you can see this is our Chinatown in one of the shopping areas. Now, in addition to having all of these different races and ethnicities, it means that we also have a variety of religions. And we have basically three main religions, and it's almost roughly the same. And that would be Christianity, and we have a variety of types of Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam. And under our constitution, everybody is allowed freedom to practice their religion. It also means like Trinidad and Tobago has like 15 holidays for the year. Public holidays, it's about 15, because everybody has a holiday. So we celebrate Eid, we celebrate Diwali, right? So the Muslims, we celebrate their Eid. For the Hindus, and this is actually the biggest Hanuman statue outside of India, it's in Trinidad and Tobago. We celebrate Diwali for Indians. We celebrate, this is an Anglican cathedral. We celebrate Christmas. We celebrate, what else? We celebrate Easter. This woman is called this is called a Shouter Baptist. And this is a merge of a religion, really, from when the slaves were there, and the slaves were practicing Christianity because of when they were on the plantations, because the slave masters were Christian and they had their own African religion. There is this merge of the two, and it is Shouter Baptist. So they are primarily Christians, but the way they worship is very African, and it's very, very merged. Now, what that brought us to was something in the education system called the Concordat. So remember, I told you kind of had to understand our whole history to understand our education system. So because we have so many different races, ethnicities, and religion, we have decided that we would give everybody the room to practice. Now, when we became independent, there were many ways to do that. We have this document called the Concordat, and it basically gives everybody the right to have schools or to go to school in what we call a denominational school, or to go to school and get your education in a school that practices your religion. Now, that may not sound, I think, out of the ordinary to you, but what happens with us is that the government actually pays 2/3 of that. And they pay 2/3 of all of the funds that those kinds of schools need. So that comes, for instance, in terms of teacher salary, they will pay 2/3 of the teacher's salary, they will pay 2/3 of the running costs of the school. In exchange as well, the school gets to choose the kids who come to the school, because typically they take the kids, even though they are government exams going into some of these schools, they do have a say in who comes to the school in order to maintain the religious balance of the school. These schools are actually the best schools that we have in the country. They tend to be some of the highest performers in the whole country. So the Concordat gives them the right to practice their religion. And if you see this girl, you see this is a school with these Muslim girls praying. That's actually an Islamic school within Trinidad and Tobago. And we have Islamic schools, we have Christian schools, we have Hindu schools, we have Shouter Baptist schools, we have every school, okay, that you can think about. Some of the smaller groups, like we don't have a lot of Jews, we don't have a lot of Baha'i, but like this gold star here is the Baha'i star, but there are a few of them, but there are not so many of them to say that it makes sense to open up a school. Like in terms of the Christians, the Shouter Baptists, the Hindus, as I said, the Christians, Muslims, and Hindus make up like a third of the population. So they have enough members in order to have an extensive set of schools, because of course the school is expensive to run and to set up. So they tend to have more of the schools. The smaller religious groups such as the Baha'i and the Jews don't tend to have like their own schooling systems, but they would go to one of the others. They might go mostly like to the Christians or something like that, somebody that is close to them. So that's the way that's handled. Okay, now another thing I want to tell you about how our history intersects with the Concordat. One of the things that happened, remember I told you, like when the Indians came across from India as indentured laborers in order to replace African labor that was on the plantation, they were sent out in the fields because they were like working in agriculture. Now, what happened is that when they were working in those agricultural areas, those areas were very far away from the town where most of the schools were. So they were basically working in agricultural areas that didn't have schools. So at that point in time, Presbyterian missionaries came into the country, and they went out into those areas, and they actually set up schools for those Indian indentured laborers. So what happened is that even though a lot of those Indian indentured laborers came across from India as Hindu, a lot of them actually ended up converting into the Presbyterian religion, which is a Christian religion, as you know, because they were now going to Presbyterian schools. So within Trinidad and Tobago, then, this thing about ethnicity, identity, and your religion, it's very, very much, it really is strongly tied together, especially in our history. Not so much anymore, but it is still. Now, I need to talk to you about the Caribbean community. Just as there is the European Union, there is something called the Caribbean community. There is something called the Caribbean community in the Caribbean. Now, our community is not such a cohesive community as the European community, because the European community, all of your laws and so on, it's one big body. So for us, member states are really still acting independently, but even though we are acting independently, we are still sharing a lot of resources and a lot of governance, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. Now, in the Caribbean community, we have 15 member states. So like Antigua and Barbuda, Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Montserrat, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and Grenadines, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago. I said Belize, right? Now, what happens is that you will notice actually, if I go back, what you would notice with some of the countries is that it actually goes all the way from Central America to countries in South America. Like Suriname and Guyana are actually on South America, and Belize is actually in Central America. So the 15 members are made up from Central America, all of the islands going down the Caribbean until Suriname and Guyana in South America. So outside of the 15 members, the 15 actual permanent and full members, we have people who have, now all of the 15 members speak English. And why is that important? You will find that the countries within the Caribbean that do not speak English, like Martinique speaks French, Curacao speaks Dutch, and the reason for that is because they are still overseas territories and they are not as yet independent. So all of the countries who speak English tend to be already independent, and they are the actual full-time members of CARICOM, or the Caribbean community. So we have some other members who are associate members who may be overseas territories of another country. So Anguilla, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, and so on. They are all associate members. And then we also have some people who have like observer status. Now, in the Caribbean community, we all share the same passport. So at the top, you will see Caribbean community. And then somewhere on the passport, you will see the name of the country. So you might see Antigua, or you might see Trinidad and Tobago or St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So because of this, we have something called, we have freedom of movement and people amongst these 15 countries. It's not as automatic for like Europe, for EU, where you can just take your car today and you can drive to another country and you can live there. We would have to apply for a special visa, but it's easy to get amongst the 15. And just we can live there as if we are living in our own country with residency. We can work, we can buy property, we can do whatever we want. Now, why is CARICOM important? CARICOM is exceptionally important because a lot of our policy documents governing our work comes from CARICOM. So a lot of our strategies come from CARICOM. So like here. So what happens is that all of these bodies govern things within the CARICOM region. And we take our curriculum development standards from CARICOM. So for instance, if you look at here where you have the Caribbean Examinations Council, our examinations will come from the curriculum, from CARICOM, because CARICOM does all of this. So CARICOM sets our Caribbean qualifications framework, and you guys will know about qualification frameworks. So we use Caribbean, a common Caribbean qualification framework. We have as well a Caribbean vocational qualification, which is competency based, so that's for TVET. So that's going to be as well for all of the members within CARICOM. We have regional occupational standards, that's again for all of CARICOM. Things like our human resource development and our 2030 strategy, all of the members of CARICOM will take that on. So as I said, it's not like in the EU where if the EU decides something, all countries perhaps take it on. We basically act, as I said, as much more independently, and then nations decide which parts of CARICOM strategy they're going to take on. But like Trinidad and Tobago, typically we take on all of them. So why is that important? Because that Caribbean Examination Council exam, especially for our secondary assessment, it tends to be run throughout. We have like 43 million people across the CARICOM. My country is like 1.4 million, but across all of the Caribbean, we have about 43 million people. So like our examination council is going to come from CARICOM. So a lot of our curriculum development, even though some of it might be national, a lot of our curriculum development work, our quality assurance within curricula, all of those things are coming and being defined by CARICOM. So that's the big picture of the system. So we could get down now into how that big picture moves into a smaller picture and how it's rolled out. So these are the phases of our education system. So we of course have ECE, which is like 3 to 5. Now you can, if you wanted to, there are some things like private preschools. Now our education system is free. So it is free straight up to, it is free from 3 to 18 years old. It is totally free. By the time you get to anything outside of 18 years old and you move into like tertiary education, it tends to be means based. So like if you are going to do your bachelor's degree, it will be, you get the amount of money according to how much your parents work for. Now it used to be totally free before, but the reason they moved it and they made it means based is because some kids were just like, they were like sitting exams many times and they would go in and they would fail, and it was really just, or they would say, I want to do this program, I don't want to do this program, then they would drop it, they would pick something else up. So they were not matriculating very well and very easily through programs, nor were they very dedicated to programs, and it was really putting a serious drain on the finances of the government. Of course, also it means that some students who actually could afford to pay, they were going for free. So the government made it a means-based system where the parent actually is going to send in all of their data, like their job letters and so on. And then the government assesses that to see, well, how much of a contribution do you get to do your bachelor's degree, say. Master's degree and anything above bachelor's tends to be 50%. You must pay 50%. But from 3 to 18, it's totally free. So now we have certain passages through these things that take a while. So early childhood education, I'll go through the slides and I'll tell you. Early childhood education centers are set up all throughout the country. It's set up according to regions. So wherever you are, in whatever region you are in, you should have an early childhood center somewhere within that region, and it's going to be free for you, right? Now we have both government and private centers. So what happens is that you can send your child to a private center if you want. That is really up to you. You can also fall back. The government has like a standard curricula for all of these things. Everything governmental from 3 to 18 is going to have some standardized kind of curricula. So the private centers basically can do what they want, because what happens at this level is that there's not a lot of testing at this level. You know, all of those kinds of standardized measures of the system doesn't really go on here at this lower level. It's basically play-based, and they have an ECE curriculum. So it means that since at this level they aren't really forced to do anything, private centers can operate a little bit more independently in terms of the curriculum framework that they adopt. Now, what happens after at primary school? Okay, now our system is exceptionally competitive. Our education system is very, very competitive. So at ages 5 to 11, they go into what we call primary school education, okay? Now, what happens is that at 11, they have to sit an exam in order to get into secondary education. It is not an automatic move. So every time you're moving, so if you move from early childhood to primary, you have to, it's not necessarily an automatic move, because not all schools are created equal, and you don't go to school in Trinidad and Tobago by where you live. It doesn't work like that. So you can go to any school. You can go to a school 4 hours from your house if that's what your parents decide. And some parents might decide that because sometimes they put the child into the school where they work as opposed to where they live. So what happens then is some schools have a very long waiting list because they're good. Some schools are not as good, so therefore they're easier to get in. It's not necessary, and this happens both at the ECE level and at the primary level, right? Again, at this primary level, you can have both governmental and you can have private education at this level as well. It is a national curriculum at this point. So whether you go to a private school or a government school, by the time you reach primary education, you have to be on the national curriculum. Like ECE, it's not so important. It's because, as I said, it's not heavily monitored like it is at this stage. And what shall I call it? I think it would be your grade 1. So basically here, you are going to have from 5 to 6 and 6 to 7, we are going to have like KG1 and KG2. Or we might call it in my country, infants 1 and infants 2. And by the time they are 7, they are going to go into what is known as grade 1, I think in the American system. Now, because the last people who owned us were the British, our entire system, our government, because we have a Westminster system of government, we have the same kind of system as Britain in terms of, this is why our education is free. This is why our medical system is free, because we are based on a British system, and our education system is the same way. Well, I guess maybe an older British system. So when they get to 7, they get to like standard, what we call standard 1. And when they get to 11 years old, they actually have to sit a national exam, which you're seeing here, C exam at the end of primary. And that placement test gets them into a secondary school. And just as we said before, all secondary schools, like all primary schools, are not created equal. And we spoke before about the religious schools. The religious schools are the most, the best schools in the country. They are better than the government schools. And what happens is, because the government is paying 2/3 of their cost, the government actually gets spaces in the school. So they cannot, even though they have a say, because it's a religious school, and they can say, well, this child is Hindu and my school is a Catholic school, so we are going to prefer to have a Catholic. They have that to an extent, but they can't really force it, because he who makes the goal makes the rules, and the government is basically paying 2/3 of their expenses. So you can understand that kind of negotiation that goes on, and it happens every year. So those people who have those kinds of schools, literally you are like in the upper, maybe 10th percentile to get into those schools in the entire country. So the commitment to get into that school, our kids are, you go to school basically 8 to 2, 8 to 3, then you go to lessons to take extra classes from 3 to 5. And those kids are doing that for years in order to get into one of the better schools. So it's an exceptionally difficult system. It's very, very competitive. So the continuous assessment. Now what is happening is we have something at standard 1 and standard 3, and it's called the Trinidad and Tobago National Learning Assessment. And what the government does, those are government exams. And what the government is doing, it is in math, English, science, general paper, agriculture, and general science. No, I said science already, right? So what happens is that they go in at standard 1, which is like grade 1, and again at grade 3. And they are given this assessment, this national assessment. This is another reason why they must have a national curriculum. The government is really testing the system itself. It's not really to say this child got an A or that child is underperforming. It really is a systemic test to see how different schools are doing and how the system itself is performing. So secondary education, like we said, at 11, they're going to do this exam and they're going to go into secondary school. So secondary school really is from the age of about 11 until the age of 18, right? Now we have lower and upper secondary. So lower secondary would be like grade 6, 7, and 8. And what happens is that, so that will be like 11, 12, 13, maybe 14, somewhere there. And at that point in time, they are going to choose their CSEC exams, which in the English system is known as ordinary level exams. Now you see these CSEC and CAPE exams, this is O-level exams and A-level exams. And these are run, as I said, by the CARICOM body responsible for that, which is called CSEC. Right? Caribbean Examination Council, CXC. So CARICOM owns the body that is running these secondary exams across the entire Caribbean for the 43 million people. Right? And as I said before, our credentialing, like in the CARICOM qualification framework, all of the leveling, as you know how programs are leveled and how you are credentialed, it all goes against the CARICOM qualification framework, which comes out of CARICOM as well. So that is why that body of CARICOM is so important. So they have lower secondary. As they get to be about 14, they're going to choose the subjects that they want to do at CSEC, which is the ordinary level. Now, from the time they enter secondary school to the time they leave, that's only 5 years. Schooling is mandatory in Trinidad and Tobago up to 16 years of age. So if you enter in Form 1 at 11, you can leave Form 5 at 16 and you're free to go. Before that, if you're not in school, you're breaking the law, right? So most of our kids who are not very academically inclined will most likely leave at the end of 5 years. So some schools only have 5 years where they just do the ordinary level, right? Some of the other schools now, the kids will not just do the ordinary level or the O levels in 5 years. They will go on to do their advanced level as well, or their A level. It's called CAPE in the Caribbean. And those schools are 7 years because they need 2 more years to do that advanced level. And then 5-year and 7-year schools can be government or they can be denominational. And denominational is those same religious schools that we talked about before. And just as in primary, in secondary, the denominational schools are the highest performing schools, as we said, even at the O level and at the A level. But again, it is the same thing that's happening. These kids are going to school from 8 to 2, 3, and then they're doing 2, 3, 4, 5 hours of extra classes every day and on the weekends in order to get the best grades for their O level and their A levels. It's a very brutal system. Now, once you leave secondary school, you can go do many things. You can go to an academic tertiary education. You can go and do your CVQs. You can go and do tech work. There's a lot of stuff for you to go and do. You don't have to move on to an academic pathway if you want. And there are many different kinds of programs. We have like UE is tertiary education. University of the Southern Caribbean, USC, that's tertiary education. University of Trinidad and Tobago, that's tertiary, and that's another university. COSTAT is more kind of a little bit of more like applied learning, like an applied learning institution. It's not like a full university. We have work-aligned programs as well. Like my son has finished his degree in psychology and he's going into like a training program that the government runs and the government pays you, right? And this is the GATE funding that I was talking about, whereby the government pays for your tertiary level education according to the means test. But once you reach master's degree, you're on 50%. But before master's degree, it's on the means test. So if your parents are very poor, they will pay 100% of your costs for you. Right? If your parents are very rich and they can afford, you will get 0. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you will get some kind of percentage. Okay? So again, we are saying we have TVET systems and we have something called an NTO, a National Training Agency, which really deals with everybody in technical vocational. So after you finish secondary school, you get your O levels, maybe you get your A levels, maybe you didn't get them. You have another pathway that you can follow. Maybe you want to go and do TVET. Some of these schools, according to the school type, some of the schools actually have TVET in the school itself. Like you may have a school that has kids that probably are not very academically inclined. They can change their curriculum and they can follow just technical vocational, plus like core courses like maths and English and whatever. Some of the other schools that are exceptionally academic, they might decide they will only do like math, English, physics, science, whatever. So according to the school type you go to, like when we were talking about here, 5-year, 7-year denominational, some of these schools actually have TVET embedded already in the curriculum because we have a national TVET syllabus, right, as well as academic syllabi. So some schools assemble that in different ways according to the clients that they get. Because remember, to get into these schools at secondary level education, you are sitting an exam. So it means that when you sit an exam, it automatically differentiates who gets into what school. So the kids who are getting like in the highest 10, like I said, the 10%, upper 10%, they tend to go to very academic schools. And the others that have very academic curricula. And the other people will go to schools which have TVET curricula. Because a principal could decide that, right? A principal could say, you see, my people, I don't want them doing any TVET because they don't need it. And then some people may say they will put TVET on because their kids like it. So that is possible. But if you put TVET on, if you go academic, you have to be within a national curricula. Yeah. And all of these national occupational standards that are within the technical vocational system, all of these things are coming, of course, from CARICOM, as we spoke about before. Special education, we do have inclusion and we do have special schools and supports, but we have a problem with a serious shortage. We don't have special education teachers in our classrooms. We will have like a service within a school. So you might have an educational psychologist or something working within the school, but the problem is that she's working with a cluster of schools. So even though the service is there, the service is going to be slow because we have too few personnel to match the number of students that that need the service. But we do have all of this within the school system. But it is we do need to beef it up because we are short on staff. Teacher training and professional standards. Basically, you have training for ECE. To work in our ECE level, you're going to need a BEd in ECE. Some, like the government, is very strict on the level of standards. So like for the government, you might need a BEd. But like if you go to a private school, they may say you can have like a certificate or, you know, an undergrad diploma or something in ECE. So typically the government institutions tend to have more qualified teachers than the private institutions. For primary as well, you need to have a BEd. You can have an associate's degree to teach at primary to start to teach, but if you want to be promoted like to a head of department, if you want to be promoted to a principal, you're going to have at least a bachelor's in education. In secondary, now when you do ECE, you can do a BEd in ECE, you can do a BEd in primary education. When you reach secondary level, you must have a content degree first. So like I told you, I'm a chemistry teacher. I have to have a certain number of credits on my degree in chemistry in order to say that I am a chemistry teacher. And the government decides. I told you, like I used to teach chemistry and math. You send your degree into the government and they say you have so many credits on your degree in whatever subject. And then they say, okay, Laila, you can teach secondary and you can teach math. So I can only teach math, honestly, like grade 6, 7, and 8. But I can teach secondary. So that is like people who are 11, 12, 13, I'm qualified to teach math for. But I can teach secondary. I can teach chemistry from 11 to 18 because I have more credits. So what you will do is you will get your content degree for secondary, and then you do your teacher training after. So it is actually an in-service program. You will already be teaching, and then you go to the university and you do 1 year as a postgraduate DPED to teach in our secondary schools. And those programs are run either by the University of Trinidad and Tobago or the University of the West Indies. Those are it's run through government organizations. We do not have private. I think now some are creeping in, but we don't particularly have a lot of private providers for teacher education, and the government pays for you to do teacher training. I believe they said they're going to phase this out maybe in a year or 2 or something, but the government pays for all of your teacher training. This as well, in terms of continuous professional development and getting points, we have this system, but it has not, I think, been firmly entrenched as well enough as yet into a teacher's life. Their ICT and so on, we have a problem with, I think, not according to where you are. It's a socioeconomic condition. According to where your school is, not everybody has access to devices. So we don't have the kind of system where we say you must. And on top of that, the Caribbean is an exceptionally low-tech place. It's not just cost, it's culture. So some of us, they still want to line up in the bank. You know, they don't want to use it, they don't want online banking, they don't feel safe with certain things. So what happens is that there are cultural ways of looking at technology, as well as access, that really prevent technology from being pervasive. And it probably is not going to be very as pervasive in other countries, because we are just, I think, not particularly interested in it. So you could literally live in the Caribbean without a cell phone easily, and not at all be hooked up to the internet, and you would survive. So technology in education, I don't think it's heavily pushed. So it's really, this is very school specific. So some of the schools are going to be like high in technology use, and some of these schools are not, from a variety of reasons, as I said, because lack of devices. If you're in a low socioeconomic school, according to the area the school is in, there's no money. And then, of course, you have cultural dispositions towards technology and education, and the government is not forcing anybody to do it. They leave it to you to decide, up to your context. However, there's a program now where I know they're giving laptops to all school children, and they're supposed to roll that out by next year. So strengths of the system, we have free education. We have a very strong exam system, as I said, but it's exceptionally very, very competitive. We have a multicultural environment, and we have most of our institutions are regionally and globally recognized. Definitely regionally, and like our universities, and so they're all globally recognized and accredited. Because when you're small like us, I think these things become even more important for you. So because when our people go abroad and they want to study, if our degrees and so on are not recognized, it's going to be a problem. Okay, I spoke about all of these things. Oh, we have some teacher shortages sometimes because, well, you know, teacher shortages. What to say about teacher shortages? It takes a very, very long time to get a teacher into a school, and there's a very long list, and there's so many people need teachers, and especially in certain subjects like math, chemistry, physics, the sciences, there are not a lot of graduates coming out, and because there are not a lot of people within these fields, and all of these schools want a chemistry teacher, it's 50 teachers graduating for the whole year, and you need 100, it just doesn't happen, right? Whereas for English, you might get 200 people graduating with an English. And some schools, of course, we have our own gang-based violence, and you know, our inner city schools and all of those things that you've seen on television. I've taught in one of those, and it has its own. And people, some of those kids are getting to 11 years old, and you know, they're not reading and so on, and they have to put special things in place for them, the usual things. I think I've spoken about this. Right? And this is just a little bit of what I think. And I spoke a little bit about it. I'm almost there, but I think I may have 4 or 5 more slides and we're done. What is happening here is that basically a lot of things, like even something like online learning, for my work in just decolonizing science, and I know people don't like words like decolonizing, it doesn't sound friendly, but basically all it's saying is that all of us need something different according to our geography, according to our context, what are our old traditions, what are our old indigenous knowledges. And indigenous does not necessarily mean Aboriginal peoples. It just means people who have been living in a land for a long time. So wherever we live, we learn to live in that place, right? So like I'm from a sea culture. I know, like when you go to the beach, you don't park your car with your engine facing the water, because the salt breeze comes off of the ocean, and you will actually jump in that car and it can't start, because especially if you're there like by the beach for a few days. I know that because I live in a culture that's from the sea, right? I don't understand how to necessarily do things from a culture that has a cold climate, because I haven't lived there. So all of this is indigenous knowledge, this thing about how do you live in a place. So all of these things need to inform, and like I said, like with online learning, and even just education systems in general, those things need to be tweaked according to whomever we are serving within the community. And to understand that, as I showed you, a lot of the way an education system is historic, or it can be historic. And then a lot of what happens is, whom are you serving? So the education system itself has to be shaped according to whom you're serving. And all of this has to be done with this idea in mind of what is your ideal graduate? Who are you trying to produce? Who are you trying to put out in the world? And this is not just about learning English or math or science or getting A's or getting 90s. It's about shaping people who must have a happy life and who must build a safe planet. So education has to be contextual and not just imported, because we have had this opportunity, especially as a very small country, paying hundreds of millions of dollars, for somebody else to come and fix our education system for us or help us with that, and not understanding who we are or that these things matter. And they put systems in place. We did this, put systems in place, and it didn't work for us. So all of these things about where you are in your geography, your culture, and as I said, online learning, 100% online learning is not going to work in the Caribbean. People thought it would, because we have 43 million people scattered across all of these islands. So we are thinking like, yeah, if you have online learning, you can get everybody online. But people don't like it. You might get 50-50, 60-40, 70-30. People don't like it. And if they don't like to learn in that way, you're not going to get them to have a good education. So your culture and your context, and in some places, electricity will go. People don't have phones, or they don't have devices, and they're not interested necessarily in getting them. So this whole thing about decolonizing education, science, is very similar to the decolonizing curriculum and decolonizing education systems. And how do we build systems that are place-based? How do we build systems for the people that we are teaching right here, right now? And yes, there is a need for, you have to stand strong locally whilst looking out globally, because you have to be globally relevant and you have to be able to exist in a global society, which we are in, because it's about connectivity and so on. But you have to be strong first where you are. So this is what I was trying to say all here. And we have to understand that it's not just in science education, but we have to think about how the curricula that we develop are acting as gatekeepers and keeping some of the kids in our classrooms out. And this is not just about Trinidad and Tobago or Lithuania, it is within our countries. So if you are developing curricula, or if you're teaching curricula, because of course we have national standards and so on, but if you're teaching curricula in the town, right, you can't teach curricula in a town or in an urban area the same way you teach the same curriculum in a rural area. You have to figure out how do you change that curricula around in order to honor the culture of the person sitting in front of you. They may be Lithuanian, but they're from a different part of Lithuania. To honor the place of that person. Otherwise, you colonize the whole curricula. It becomes a gatekeeper. It becomes a hegemonic stance that locks certain children out of learning and out of development. So that's a lot of what post-colonial thought is. I know these words are not always, people don't always agree with these words, I think a lot of times because we don't understand what they mean. But it really is, how do we make a space for everybody within our curriculum to learn? And this is another piece I wrote, Blue Crab Does Run Full Moon. This is something from my culture. Whereas when when you're going to hunt crabs in my culture, they're these blue crabs and they run across the beach. So you don't hunt blue crabs unless the full moon is out. So when the full moon is out, they just come out of their holes and they run across the beach. You just have to pick them up. Otherwise, they're always in their holes. And in our form of English, we say blue crab does run full moon. So this is what we call indigenous knowledge. I know this, as I said, just as I know about don't park my car with the engine facing the ocean, because of its place-based, it's where I'm from. So how do we incorporate these place-based kinds of things within curricula? And even as we take national curricula within classrooms, how do we adapt it just for the children who are in front of us in order to give them access? So these are some of the things that I think about, right? And I spoke about why I think education has to end up being, have a place-based model in order to preserve culture, to preserve historical realities and to deal with them, to democratize learning in the end, because everybody, it's not just physical. I always say to my students, when we talk about access, it's physical access to the curriculum, it's cognitive access to the curriculum, it's cultural access to the curriculum, right? Anything outside of that is a hegemonic stance that locks people out. And we have to be careful with that, yeah? Okay, and so this is just my conclusion. It's a picture from Tobago, yeah. And this is it for me today. So thank you for having me. Does anybody have any questions or concerns? Or anything they would like to add?
Thanks, Laila. It's really rich presentation, and you were able to manage time. It's also so fine. And I think we have some questions in the chat. If you
can you read it out to me, Vincentas?
Yeah, just first question about some challenges. Obviously, you mentioned some of them, but as I, for example, personally have read in different information sources that, let's say, one of the most significant challenges facing education in your country is related to equal access to quality education for all. I mean, for all students, for all groups. Can you comment on this?
Yes. Okay. So, so it says, I'm not seeing it in my chat here. So you're seeing that one of the things is unequal access. Yes. I think yes, there is unequal access. He's saying there's unequal access to education, and please comment on this. Is that what the question is?
Yes, sure.
Could you tell me what was the preamble to the question again? Can you read that out to me? I'm not seeing it in the chat.
Equal access to quality education for all is like one of the main challenge in education in your country.
Yes, correct. So I think what happens is, like I said at the end, there is physical access to the curriculum. So as I said, up to 16 years old, you must attend school, and there is provision for you to attend school. The government pays for you to attend school unless you decide to go to a private school. That's up to you. In some schools, like in the poorer schools, the government provides meals and all of those kinds of things. So they have physical access, but cognitive access is very much still a problem. And I think because education systems are power hierarchies in many ways. So the schools that are the best schools and that everybody wants to go to, a lot of times what happens is that if you are a person who has means, you have connections, you know a lot of people, you may be able to get into those schools more easily, because I said it's not simply a question of going to the school that's in your neighborhood. The best school might be 40 kilometers away or 30 kilometers away from you. and then everybody in the country is going to say that's the best school and I want to go there. And the law does not say, like in the United States, you have to go to school in your area. The law doesn't say, no, you must go to school in this area. So then everybody from the country is going to say, I want to go to that school. And then what happens now is that school is going to have an opportunity to choose who comes in, because they have such a lot of people coming to them. And then it becomes our power and negotiation it becomes a negotiation of how do I let your child into that school. So it becomes more like a power hierarchy almost, right? Of who can get in and who can't get in. How do we solve that? We have been discussing that for many years, and hopefully we will come up with the solution. And one of the problems is that the best schools are the denominational schools, and the Concordat protects the denominational schools in terms of who they can let in. So even though the government pays 2/3 of their running costs, because the Concordat protects the freedom of religion, and to say that the people who are this religion have a right to be educated about their religion, and within the framework of their religion, it provides a lot of power for a school to decide who they will take and who they will not take. So it again sets up that power hierarchy. And it's very difficult. We would have to remove, I think, perhaps the Concordat, and that becomes very, very political.
Okay, thanks, Laila. And next short question about tuition fee, about some financing. For example, who pays for at private schools, for example? Is it needed to pay, or if yes, what is amount, let's say?
Okay, so again, if you go from ECE, from say like birth to 18, if you want to go to a private school, this is your choice. It's free. But if you don't want to go to a government school, that's your choice. So if you decide,
but who pays? Who pays in private school?
The parent will have to pay, because the parent has decided to send the child to that school. But there's another thing again that comes. The best private schools are denominational schools as well. But you would have to pay for that out of your own money. If you want to go to a private school, the government does not pay. The government only pays for the government schools. And this is until 18.
I see next question from our students. What are relationships between different religion communities?
We don't have any violence in our society with this, and we intermarry. So for instance, even for me, my mother was Catholic, my father was Muslim. What happens is that we intermarry very easily. There are underlying tensions, of course, within the society. I don't think it's so much religion as it is more race than religion in our societies. But the religions get along fine. And what happens is that the religion is built into our curriculum. So for instance, typically, if it's Diwali, there is Diwali celebrations in every school. If it's Eid, there are Eid celebrations in every school. If it's Christmas, it's Christmas celebrations in every school. So typical, and like denominational schools, they will have religion. So they might have religious classes every week. In government schools, there's a time for religion, and everybody goes to their own class. So if that's Monday at 8 o'clock, somebody from the Hindu religion comes in and teaches the Hindus, somebody from the Christian religion comes in and teaches the Christians. So I think what this does is that it sets up a lot of tolerance in the society for religion. So like for Christmas, we have this Christmas tree on the highway that the government puts up. And on one side, you have the Eid symbol, because you know, normally like Eid, then you have the star on the top. And on the other side, you have the only sign from Hinduism. So we don't tend to have a lot of friction with religions.
Mm-hmm. It's really good. Dangoy, are you happy with the answer?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm happy.
Okay. It's really important because having in mind this let's say multinational society and so diverse society, it's really important. And the next possible my questions, please students write in the chat, etc. It would be really nice. You mentioned, can you comment shortly about school climate concerns? What does it mean? What do you have in mind?
Oh, we have all kinds of schools. So it's the whole range, right? So when you have very high performing schools and we have very low performing schools, and then we have in the middle. I don't know, maybe all societies, I don't know. And then we have the same way. We have some schools, for instance, that are in very good neighborhoods with everything, you know. So they have high SES. The parents are, you know, professionals. You know the whole picture. And then we have kids who are low SES. Their parents are not very well educated. They're in dangerous neighborhoods. So the climate is totally different. The levels of safety in the school, the levels of activities in the school, whether it's be violence, gang-based violence, whether they're hyper, it's the whole range. Did I answer your question?
Oh yes, more or less. But from one side, it's like tolerant society, right? It's on the other hand, the school climate, let's say, this is also school climate has some roots, let's say, some causes, because, for example, like you mentioned, violence possible, etc., etc. Yeah, how to manage all this?
We have been having this as a national conversation for many years, and we have thought that one of our problems is we need to make every school a high quality school. We've had that conversation about, you know, how do we make every school a high quality school instead of having so much disparity between schools.
It seems mission impossible.
I don't think it's impossible, but I think there's a lot of historic things that you would have to get rid of, and that you would have to change. And as I said, like the denominational schools are the highest performing. It's very different like in Barbados. In Barbados, the government schools are better than the denominational schools. In Trinidad and Tobago, the denominational schools are better than the governmental schools. But so can we make all schools the level of a denominational school? But what also happens in denominational schools is that they have more resources. Even though the government pays 2/3, right? They have a little bit more leeway to do things that cannot necessarily be done in a government school. So for instance, I can possibly be allowed, like if I was in a denominational school and I lacked resources, you could ask for more things from the parents than you could necessarily ask in a government school, because they have that ability to do it. You know, it's not just when the government has funded you 100% and therefore you cannot go out and maybe do X, Y, Z in order to get more money or to get more resources or to get more. They just have more bandwidth. The Concordat gives them more bandwidth, I think, to do a lot of things. So it's like, how do we get all of these schools up to that level? I think that is what it is.
Oh, okay. And next question, just for me, also interesting. Do teachers have professional categories or professional ranking system?
Do we have a ranking system?
Yeah, for teachers, professional categories. For example, let's say like junior teacher or senior teacher or some higher position, etc. Or not?
Yeah. It's typically ranked like from where you teach. And so for instance, people who are at the primary level, they are known as like, they have like a T1. So if I say somebody is a teacher 1, I know they have a BA, they're teaching at a primary level. They're not going to be teaching at a secondary level. So they have basically up to undergrad. When you get to secondary, you will be like a T2 because you have undergrad and postgrad, because your teacher training is like a postgrad license, right? Plus your first degree. And then you can be promoted to a head of department, you can be promoted then to vice principal, you can be promoted to principal. So if you're promoted to a head of department, what you are is that you are within a subject specialization normally. So like for me, I was head of department like the science division, or somebody can be head of department of the English division or of the math division. And then you move up to vice principal or principal. And then after that, typically you move out of the schools into the so there you're on a school level, but then you can also be promoted outside of a school level to a system level and become like a curriculum officer. So now you're managing curriculum across the country. Yes. So there are whole range. There are a lot of levels. Yeah.
And in relation, in continuation to previous question, what about teachers, teacher profession prestige? Let's say, is it prestigious profession in your society or somehow different?
It's a difficult profession in my society. You know, I think because then I don't think we're very well paid as teachers. So I think that's one. We're not one of the most well-paid professions as well. And I think the prestige, again, a lot of it tends to come from, I think generally the school you teach at, which really doesn't make much sense, because so if somebody teaches at a more difficult school, because some schools are, a lot of this is just like the schools that are the worst schools are in the areas that don't have much. The worst schools are in the areas where they need the best schools. There's no money, they have low SCS, you know, the culture of schooling is different. Parents themselves, the home itself may not have the facilities, you know, people are working, they have a different education, but they don't have the facilities and that cultural capital to be successful within the school. And the teachers in those schools tend to be disrespected the most. So people tend to look at those teachers and think they're not good teachers because these schools are not performing well at the national exams. And I have told you our national exams are pretty brutal. You really have to be, kids are going to school for 8 hours and then kids are going to extra lessons for more time in order to be successful at those national, because you have to be, like I told you, to get into the best secondary schools, you're in the top 10 or 15 percentile of the entire country, right? So I think what happens is you now have people thinking of teachers in different schools as either a good teacher or a bad teacher. But the truth is, this is what is happening, right? When you sit that examination to get into secondary school, the kids, a lot of the kids who are already weak are going to go into these weaker schools because they're in the lower section, right? And they, of course, it's like the whole system is, they just go, it's just like, I don't know, what is it now? They're just continuing in this pattern now. Whereas these kids who are in the top 10%, they're going into the better schools. So it's like the system is working in their favor. So and then our system tends to be very, very, it's like really academic. So it's like, how do we get these lower performing kids then, perhaps to get into schools that are catering more to their needs? A lot of the kids over here, I find, are kids who they probably need they need a different kind of teaching and a different kind of schooling. The schooling system is really matching the needs of these kids over here. And these kids here are the ones falling behind, and we need to pay more. We definitely need to pay more attention to them. So they're not passing the exam and doing well, and then they're going into these schools. So I think the teachers who in these schools are actually, a lot of times, deserve a lot of respect, because there's a national exam here and there's another national exam here, right? At the end of primary and at the end of secondary. So we also have something else at math, another test. So what happens is this: these kids come in here and these kids come in here, but all of them are going to the same level here. So in the high performing schools, they just have this gap to close, right? Because the kids who are coming in at the end of primary are coming out at a higher level. These are like the top 10%. So when they have to come out of secondary, they're right here. But then the other kids who are lower in the system, they're starting out down here. They have the same 5 years to reach here. So therefore, what on this side needs is it needs more supports in order to get from here to here. But it is the same thing that you read in the literature. A lot of the kids on this side are in schools where they don't have counselors. They don't have enough special education support. They're low SCS. It's the classic demographic. Classic. So that we know for people who underachieve. So what has to be done here now is to deal with all of these items of underachievement very, very carefully in order to bring them up.
Okay, and the possible last question from our students. In your country, are children in early childhood education usually placed in same age groups or mixed age groups? And what is the typical group size?
No, early childhood education tends to work very, very well. So they're 10 and under, they're mixed. You know, they have like, you know, they may have like when you go in, you have an auntie. So even if you have like 4 little groups, it's like a little house, right? And then they have, you know, all of their little play areas outside and so on. So if you have like 50 kids and they're broken up into like 10 little groups, they're not like in separate classes. They have like those nice little play areas. Do you know what I mean? When you go in and then you have the little station and you have drama station and they have, you know, whatever station and whatever station. So it tends to be set up very well. Early childhood, I think, is doing a very good job.
Gedre, possible wants to explain in more details your question or to clarify, because I'm not sure that answer was correct.
Yeah, I understand it. It's okay. I understand that size of group doesn't matter, and it's like a big playground and separate areas. No?
Oh no, the size of they are typically up to the size. The size is normally it's normally age. Is it 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, 1 to 10? Like it gets smaller as you go younger, right? So in early childhood, the numbers tend to be exactly to the number of caregivers that is supposed to be there. If it's 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, my understanding from the question you asked is, are they in separate areas? And the answer is no, they're not in separate areas, but they are assigned to a separate teacher.
No, the question was, what is group size? For example, one group.
I think it's about 1 to 10 or something. Early childhood is what age you mean? 3 to 5?
Yes.
3 to 5 would somewhere between 5 and 10. No more than 10.
So small group.
It's a small group.
I think so.
So even if you have 50 kids in the class, they will be broken up between 5 people. And it's not a class. They tend to look like little houses, you know what I mean? It's not like a classroom. They're like, you know, like when you go into a house and then over there they can have math area, and over there they have play area, and over there they have whatever area. The early childhood centers the governmental early childhood centers even are very, very well set up. And they're all over the country. Because what happened, it is probably maybe 15 to 20 years ago, there was a noticed gap in children who were entering primary school at 5 with no early childhood, and children who were, and their reading and so on was being accelerated if they had done early childhood. And what they found from the research is that the people who were going into early childhood, it was all private. So you had to have enough money to pay to go to early childhood centers. So those children obviously had a head start again by the time they got into primary school, so that their achievement was faster. But what the government did is they built a series of early childhood centers all across the country, and they made them free. So what happened then is that everybody now has free early childhood education, and they did a lot of it. It's developmentally appropriate. It's play based. There is an early childhood education curriculum. We have an early childhood degree, as I said, a B.Ed at the university. If you work at the government center, you are going to have a B.Ed. If you work at a private center, you can probably have like a little lower than the B.Ed, maybe like an early childhood education certificate or some kind of diploma, so on. But the government is going to require you normally to have a higher qualification.
Thank you very much, Laila, and possible no more questions. It's really exhaustive and rich, rich presentation and good discussion. Obviously, we have, I guess, we have more interesting questions, but time is limited.
Now, seeing, you mean mixed age groups?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, mixed age groups. What happens, as I said, they're like from 3 to 5. So like they are going to be placed like 3 to 4, 4 to 5. But even though like if I am with my auntie and I'm 3 to 4 and 4 to 5, the school is on those early education centers are not very like separatist. It's not like you're over here and you're on. I don't know if I'm explaining it well. So even though they're in separate age groups, they are in these smaller groups. They're not necessarily, when it's playtime, the ages can play together. So teaching time might be a little bit more, but when they're all there integrated. You know, like when I go into a secondary school classroom, this classroom is for Laila, this classroom is for Vincentas, and we are bordered off by walls. A lot of those early childhood centers have a very kind of like a fluid sort of flow. So yes, the children are they are within their little group, they are within like ages, but the way the centers are set up, they can still have interactions. Am I answering your question properly?
Yes, it's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. Thanks, Laila. Keep well. Thank you very much once again on behalf of my students and myself. I wish you big success in your personal academic life, etc. Keep well, and please make some plans to visit Lithuania and in particular Šiauliai.
Thank you very much.